This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 454 for Thursday, October 27th, 2022. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we're into. Back this week, Alastair McFly, co-host of Long Range Sensors and Short Range Sensors. Both podcasts can be found at longrangesensors.com, and of course, at Alastair McFly on all the social media that matters, including Twitch. Hello, my friend. It's been a minute.
Kapla! It has been. I normally just go hello, and I thought I'll just shake it up and and throw in a bit of Klingon there to be on brand.
Keep the Star Trek fans on their toes, as it were.
That's it.
And we are going to be talking about Trek this week. That's one of my favorite things about having you on the show is, of course, your deep knowledge of Star Trek and all things coming up. And I have seen, thanks to you pointing them out, some of the new trailers for the upcoming series. I'm most excited about Picard, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. I do want to kick off the show with some non-sci-fi news. It's science fact, as a matter of fact. The JWST has released an image of the Pillars of Creation with their NearCam technology. This is from webtelescope.org. The Pillars of Creation are set off in a kaleidoscope of color in NASA's James Webb Telescope near infrared light view. This is a region where young stars are forming or have barely burst from their dusty cocoons as they continue to form. Newly formed stars are in the nebula as scene stealers. They are the bright red orbs that sometimes appear with 8 diffraction spikes. Hubble's previous image of the Pillars of Creation pales in comparison because Hubble uses mostly visual light, which cannot penetrate the particles and dust in the nebula. The Pillars of Creation are 6,500 light years away from us here on Earth. And for more fun and interesting facts about the Pillars of Creation, I'm going to defer everyone to the Space Gal on TikTok. Emily Calandrelli has a really fun video on the JWST image, which starts off by saying, "Listen up, people, if you enjoy a good existential crisis," which I thought is a great way to get your attention with science. Also sharing things like the Pillars of Creation are 4 to 5 light years in length, because someone in her comment section said, like, okay, so like give it to me in like how many Empire State Buildings tall is this? And she's like, no, you don't get it. And she's very polite about it. Like she's just like, she's trying to explain to everybody like just how freaking big these things are. The Pillars of Creation are actually just a small portion of the Eagle Nebula, which is 70 light years across. So not away, it is 70 light years in diameter.
Yeah.
And the Pillars of Creation are just like this little nub, kind of in the middle of it. And it's a very famous image. Like it's been on the internet for a while from Hubble. And but I really enjoy Emily's content. She does some really, really cool stuff. And she's always very excited about science. And from what I can tell, she's I think the TikTok is supporting like a science show that she does like on YouTube, and it's like in getting kids excited in science and stuff like that. But as such, she's a very intelligent and very down to earth like educator. So like she gives it to you in like layman's terms, but she still uses the proper scientific language for it, which is great because like I'm not an astrophysicist, so like learning this stuff is better to start with baby steps.
It's TikTok as well, so I imagine that these are very short bite-sized things too.
Oh yeah,
rather than like a massive 20-minute or half an hour YouTube breakdown of things.
Although you'd be surprised, I can't remember his last name. Forrest is his first name, and he's another science educator and a scientist and author on TikTok. And he'll do like a 3-minute video, and it's dense. Like there's a lot of information that when they're really good educators and they have a lot of facts at their disposal and they're just cramming it into this 3-minute video, they can get an awful lot in there to the point where like you have to rewatch it to like, did I retain all of what they just said? But yeah, it's I find like because I've been talking with other friends about TikTok that are not on the platform, and I don't post anything on the platform. I've been trying to figure out whether I want to for a while, not because I want to be on there, but because for promoting Twitch and podcasts and stuff, it might be a decent way to do it. The problem is that I'm not on camera in anything that I do, so audio clips on Twitch don't really. You'd have to have other video, some other hook, visually. One of the things that I've noticed is that like I don't necessarily watch a lot of nonsense. People dismiss TikTok as nonsense, and the vast majority of it is, believe me. But when that starts happening, I start scrolling faster, or I turn it off and I start again. Like I close the app and start again. Because what I'm interested in from TikTok, what I enjoy from it, are things like cooking videos, recipes I can bookmark, science stuff like this about pillars of creation from like the Space Gal or other accounts. For a while there, it was a lot of like dog training and dog videos and stuff like that. And I still enjoy. If I'm going to watch fluff on TikTok, it's probably dog videos. That's fine. I think that I enjoy the serotonin hit. There's a really funny video, and I don't remember. I didn't bookmark it, but it was a Australian Shepherd, full grown, standing with an Australian Shepherd puppy running around it in circles, like just tight little circles around this other dog, nonstop, just like zip, 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 zip. And the captions that they had put over the video were millennials in the workforce over the main dog, and then Gen Z was tracking the little puppy as it went around in circles. And I was just like, that's hilarious. Like it really was. It really, really was funny, and the cuteness of it, of course, was over the top because like the Australian Shepherds are so floofy when they're puppies. It was just this little ball of fur like running around in circles. Obviously, as a sci-fi fan, have you been following any of the NASA news, the JWST stuff over the last little while?
I have done earlier in the summer, but not recently. Not over the last, I'd say probably 2 months, maybe.
So, what else is new with you?
I actually discovered something that I wasn't ever expecting to. I went to Strange Adventures, which is a comic book store that we have here in Halifax, and I found out that there's some Bill and Ted toys that have been re-released. Because this seems to be quite a big common thing right now as well. Is you'll have classic toys, and it's happening with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're bringing out like the remakes of the classic figures. When I was a kid, I had a Bill and Ted figure, which was kind of weird because it would they'd have little headphone sockets on the backs, and you plug them into a cassette tape, and they'd have a little amp speaker. And the idea is that you had this music that was really good, but the music only played when you squeezed their legs. So the idea is you'd squeeze their legs repeatedly, and it would just make it sound like they can't play guitar, which is a really kind of fun way of doing it. But I had these two figures when I was a kid, and I never had the phone booth. I remember looking at the back of the blister pack, and they had the phone booth there, and it looked great. Never, ever could find it anywhere. And it was there in Strange Adventures just last week. So I've ended up picking up one of these recreations of it, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's by a company called Incendium, and I no longer have the figures to go with it, and the figures are expensive. I think they're like $50, $60, something like that, a piece, which is nuts. And this is just for the regular play figures, not with the headphone jacks in the back like I had when I was a kid. And whilst I was trying to find a link to share with you, I found that there's also a life-size Bill and Ted phone booth by a company called Cubicle, who make, basically phone booths for offices and things like that. So it's a life-size one that can be used as a landline and for VoIP calls, and it is $9,345.
Oh my gosh.
Which is like 12,500 Canadian dollars. I was like, no.
No. No.
That's a bit more out of my price range.
Now, because of the popularity of another phone booth I can think of,
yes,
the TARDIS from Doctor Who, have there been replicas, like life-size replicas of that? Because I can see that also fetching $10,000, and people maybe not barking at that.
I've seen plenty that have been constructed by people. I don't know if there's been ones that have been commercially available like that. If they have, then probably not for a long time. I know that there was another sort of comic book store here in Halifax that closed down sadly, but they had one outside. Um, I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, they had one just outdoors. And when they packed up shop, that was one of the things that they sold off. And again, for a crazy amount of money that I couldn't afford. Plus, I was sharing an apartment with somebody at the time, so I didn't really have the room.
And that's the thing, when you're in an apartment, like there's only so much room that you can dedicate to nerdy stuff like that. When it starts to become like furniture level size stuff,
Oh
I
yeah.
would imagine the hardest thing about the hardest piece, if you were to make something like this on your own with the Bill and Ted's excellent phone booth, is the phone. Like
Mm,
you very rarely see payphones on the street ever anymore.
yeah.
And I think even finding a unit, especially if you want it to be a working unit, it would have to be maybe something that's made up. I doubt that you'd actually ever find like a real payphone from years ago, because I
Yeah.
don't know what
And
they've done with them. And I imagine they've just been like decommissioned for parts, or maybe they've been sent to Hollywood. When they have to do like period pieces and stuff like that, and they need
yeah,
phone booths and
maybe.
things.
I know that the cubicle ones, they also have the buttons light up like in the movie, which is kind of cool. One other thing that I've been spending a lot of my money on lately is Star Trek: The Customizable Card Game, which I think I may have told you about previously.
Is this like a digital card game, or is it like like a tabletop, like physical
This
game?
is tabletop. This is physical. So this is an old game from 1994,
Oh, okay.
and it was one of the first competitors to Magic the Gathering. So Magic the Gathering started off this entire customizable card game thing, and Decipher made the Star Trek customizable card game, and to the license, it is actually very, very good. It uses a lot of mechanics that you would expect. Like you have a space line of planets and space phenomena, and you have ships that travel up and down the space line. You can beam people down, beam people up, get into space battles, and all this kind of stuff. It's really, really quite good. And I had a couple of starter decks when I was a kid, but the problem is that the way they distributed the cards was so random that even with a couple of them, I didn't have enough to even play a game. So I never played, but over the years, I've kind of collected more and more. And recently, I ended up getting a massive pile. I've almost doubled it. I mean, I'm into the probably the four digits number of cards right now. So insane amount. But for the first time since the mid 90s, I actually have been able to play some games with people in person, including with Megan as
Oh,
well.
nice. Very cool.
Yeah, our good friend Megan Townsend. So the feedback has been great. Everybody I've played it with has loved it. I've even managed to play online using an app called Lackey CCG. It's a free app for just playing a bunch of different customizable card games. Somebody made a plugin for it, so I've been able to play with a couple of friends back in England as well, and that's been surprisingly good. And especially for them, they don't have to buy any cards either.
Yeah, I guess if you can have access to it, if people can just like play either digitally or physically, that's an interesting mix. I've heard of different apps that people
Mm,
use for online Dungeons and Dragons, campaigns where
yeah.
it just allows people to kind of communicate and have like a virtual tabletop, which might be the name of the app actually. And I've heard a lot of people say that like the tools have improved over the last few years. Specifically, I think over the pandemic, that definitely some development has gone into those tools. But I didn't
Yeah.
think about card games that would be both digital and physical in order to have that work, so that players or friends abroad that don't have the decks or just aren't collectors could then still participate. You could use your physical tech and they could use like a virtual one. I never thought about that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really neat. And another game that is probably my favorite board game. I even streamed it on Twitch. Is Star Trek Ascendancy. They've brought out two new expansions for it. It's a 4X game, so it's pretty big in scope. It's a board where you're exploring planets, and so you've got all these sort of system disks that you flip over, and so the board isn't like a set physical board. It builds itself as you go out. And one of the key things I love about it is every race plays true to themselves. So you got the Federation who gain bonus points for exploring, but they can't make contact with pre-warp civilizations. You've got the Klingons who they get points for going out and battle, but they can't retreat. You've got the Romulans who kind of keep to themselves, but they also have cloaking technology, so they get first strike every single time because they kind of pounce on you. So it's really cool for that. And they've brought out the Breen, which was a race from Deep Space Nine, who are very territorial. So if you like to kind of turtle in games, I feel that they're going to be the best kind of species for that. And then there's the Dominion, which is a massive, big expansion, which adds a new game mode where you can actually have the Dominion War. So the idea is that for 4 players, you'd have 2v2.
Okay.
And it's nuts. You've got the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant in there. And so you've got now the Alpha and Gamma Quadrant. It's nuts just how big this thing is getting. So those are 2 brand new expansions that were released when we thought that the game was over and there weren't going to be any more. And so now I'm having to make new foam core inserts for all the boxes to fit all the components. There's so many of them. And of course, with that, they have escalation packs. So if you need additional ships, there's new star bases. So of course, I ordered those. I have given this company so much of my money. Gale Force 9 are the company who make it, but it is by far my favorite tabletop board game. And both of these games I'm going to be covering on a future episode of Short Range Sensors at some point.
This is the one that I think you've told me about the most, and I've certainly seen the most pictures of. Because I remember speaking with you about the foam insert plan. Like you were just like, what's the best, course of action for like figuring out this organized. I really wish that companies would, I guess they would end up using it to make more money and overcharge. I feel like when you have a game like that has that many pieces, you should included in the box should be some sort of organizational storage thing.
I know. The box inserts are more for shipping the components rather than storing them. Especially when you get a lot of card punch outs and that's what this game's like. You get a load of cards, so they lay flat in the box, but once you punch them all out, there's not really much room in the box for that stuff. And one of the things I've been able to do with all these foam core inserts is fit most of the existing expansions, bar one, which is the Borg, into the base game box. So I managed to fit a lot there, and then the Breen and Dominion I'm having to put into their own one, which is fine because they kind of work more together anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, it allows you to consolidate a lot of these pieces into just a single box, which makes life a lot easier as well.
With regards to the pieces, like, are there things that you could display, or is it better to kind of have them all tucked away in boxes? Like they're not things that they serve more of a game purpose rather than also double as like, this would look really good on a shelf, that kind of thing. I'm thinking mostly of like Warhammer, like, how Warhammer figures, like some people, they don't really play Warhammer 40K. Like they paint the figures and it's cool and they display them and that's it.
The pieces, because you're not a captain controlling a single ship, you are the Federation, you are the Klingon Empire. So you have like several ships, so they're absolutely tiny. So they're not very big pieces. So they're not really good for displaying. But there are people who have actually done basically the Warhammer style way of painting things, just doing it like they're miniatures. And I've seen some very impressive paint jobs on it. That is way above my skill set. There's no way that I could paint to that level of detail at that scale. No way. But there are some people who've done that, and that is impressive. And if it was done like that, then maybe, sure. But overall, not. I wouldn't say so with this game.
I had someone ask me, if I've ever done any model painting or miniature painting and whatnot because of my art background. And I mean, I've never been a painter. I've done some digital painting, but I've never really been a physical painter. I always leaned heavily on mostly dry media in school, but then, ink and cartooning and black and white and stuff like that. But as much as I like detail in my work, there is a limit to the physical size. Like I used to draw my comic strips at 16 plus inches wide, and then they would be shrunk down and displayed online. Because whenever it came to doing detail on one of my characters, I really don't like the teeny tiny little marks, like just having to like get your nose right down to the paper. And so when I watch people paint these online, one of the streamers I follow, Wolf Machina, does the odd stream where he paints miniatures, and he's got like a magnifying glass, and like he's doing these tiny tiny little details. And the perfectionist in me, combined with my big hands, it would be like oil and water. I would not enjoy the experience, I don't think, of trying to get it to look just the way that I want when the thing that you're painting is so tiny. It's like the belt buckle on an orc or something. And knowing that it would be such a tedious process to get that done. That's why when I moved to digital art, one of the things that I enjoyed was putting in extra detail, because you can zoom in. You can make the belt buckle like the size of your computer screen. And while that's similar to a magnifying glass, you don't have to have the same minute motor skills to do the painting. You can still paint in broad strokes, but you're just, you're zoomed in. And so I've never gotten into it. And plus, like, I think early on in my art career, when that would have been something that I would have, been potentially into, the cost of getting into a hobby like that was always just like, nope. I can tell from my trips to the comic store how much money these things cost. I need to stay away. I know I will like it, but I cannot afford it. Back when that was the thing.
When you digitize them, were you converting them into vector-based shape so that you could expand them to whatever size and not lose detail, or?
No, on purpose. No, converting to vector was a pain, and you'd lose nothing. It was never perfect. Like, you'd always end up with a line that didn't connect, or something would be fuzzy, because ultimately ink on paper has like an edge. And one of the things I actually had to do in Photoshop, and this was also a time saver thing. So when I was drawing the Star-Crossed comic strip, like when I scanned it in at like 300 or 400 DPI, it would be in two parts. I'd have to scan half of the comic and then the other half of the comic, and then I'd have to line them up. Usually not a big deal, because usually the panels would be where I would make that snip, so I wasn't cutting across the artwork. But I had to make an imperfect brush in Photoshop, because if I went in with the default Photoshop brush, ink bleeds on paper. And when you've got that kind of resolution in your scan and you're drawing a line, the edge of that line has to have like a little bit of a fuzz to it, like a little bit of inconsistency. Otherwise, it looks too perfect and it looks too digital. And you could look at something that I drew on paper and then fixed a mistake or added something later digitally, and the digital line would stand out dramatically against the hand-drawn line. Not because they were different, like in terms of their shape or quality. It'd be more like, it's like the rendering of the line. The edges of the line had mathematically perfect edges, in Photoshop. But then the line that I drew on paper would have the grain of the paper underneath it. And so you had to kind of create that illusion of imperfection. And in a way, it was great, because it meant that I couldn't get in and do like really tight pixel detail, which I could get sucked into in Photoshop. And it would just be a waste of time that no one would ever see. I would get it, but it would just be a time sink. And I would be 8 hours doing a comic that should have taken me 4, And right. So I never went the vector route. I never really, I think because of my old school training, like I never really went the whole vector art thing, with the exception of when I worked in animation, because that's what you had to do. That was the program. But I always preferred Photoshop over vector programs in terms of drawing.
And just stylistically, I take it you prefer seeing the imperfections there as opposed to something as sharp as vector-based comics? Or does it just depend on the comic style?
No, it depends. And there's different programs out there now that are vector-based that do have those kind of imperfections built in. And so
really?
they're meant to, like, things like I think I don't know what it's called now. It's changed names a couple of times, but Manga Studio was one that came out when we were doing Comics Coast to Coast, and it was a vector program, or it billed itself as a vector like program, where you could do like a brush stroke and it would have like an arc to it that you could control with nodes and all the ways that vector normally works. But then it would have like this kind of like faux brush feather kind of at the end of it, which would be normally something you would only get in a raster program. So it kind of split the difference. And it would then allow you to do vector for things like your panel borders and speech balloons and stuff like that. But then when it came to hand drawing, it had a pencil tool and you could do sketches, and then your ink drawing would kind of like snap over that. And I always had an issue with like those kind of things kind of taking out, in my opinion, the artist's natural lines. So I had a compliment paid to me by Peyton, a friend of ours, and one of the guys that started the show with me. I can't remember what image he was looking at, but it was a piece that I had done for someone, and he came in while I was working on it, and he's like, "Man, this is going to sound weird, but I mean this as a compliment. But like, I could tell from like the blade of grass that you just drew that you drew it." And I was just like, "What?" And he's like, you've got an arc to some of your stuff. Like he's an artist as well. And the fact that he could pick up on that. And I was like, I think that's what I miss about the big influx of digital comics and stuff online and web comics. Was sometimes people were still drawing them by hand like me, but other times when they were doing it digitally, their characters were unique, their writing and story and jokes were all unique, but on a line level, what I was seeing was everybody looked the same, right? Because the programs that were popular were homogenizing the line, the artist's line, I guess is the best way to say it. It's a hard thing to express verbally, but it's, in the same way that, say, like if you signed your name and a computer turned it into vector, it's not going to look the same. It's going to look like your name. It's going to be legible. It's going to be legal if it's used in like signing a document. But if you put it next to you signing your name over and over again 4 or 5 times on a piece of paper, it's not going to be the same experience for the viewer if you're looking at that artistically and not just as a signature. And it's the same thing with artists. I mean, your work ends up being as much of your signature as your handwriting is. So, but yeah, working on things like physical models. I think the closest I get now, and people on my Friday streams can attest to this, when I have to put the decals on Lego pieces and I have to get out the tweezers and put like this little like 5x7mm sticker on this barely bigger than that piece of Lego. Like it's tough. It's not my favorite part of the build. There's a couple of memes in chat where it's just like, we loathe stickers. it's not the best experience, because like when you get them crooked, they're hard to fix, because like the Lego stickers are meant to stay on there. And I always revel when they have important pieces that are pre-printed. I understand it increases the cost of the model. But for example, the Optimus Prime, his shoulder pads, he's got these great big white Autobot symbols. And I'm so glad I didn't have to center those and make those perfect, because you'd want them to be. They're a key, kind of part of the figure in terms of the visual appearance. But they were pre-printed pieces that you just clicked on Lego, which is great. That to me is a better experience when it comes to the really important stuff. Now, other things like headlights and grills and things on the truck, they were decals that you had to put on. Moving into the main discussion this week, I can touch on a new show that I've been watching. We are going to get into some Star Trek news as well, but I wanted to stay in the realm of sci-fi and talk about The Peripheral on Prime Video, starring Chloe Grace Moretz, Jack Rayner, and Louis Herthum. Haven't seen much from Louis Herthum, but this show is only just starting. But I will tip my hat to Rayner and Moretz. Fantastic acting off the start. Really enjoyed the pilot. I am about halfway through episode 2. Episode 3 isn't out yet. It comes out tomorrow, I believe. So it's one of those things that's being released week to week, which you and I have discussed before is a good way, I think, to release new shows, especially shows that ask a lot of questions or have a lot of mystery to them. I'd rather have that trickle. I say trickle only because we're used to things like, dumps on Netflix where it's binge watching. But shows like this, I think, are good for this kind of release. The Peripheral is a near future sci-fi series. I believe it's set in like 2039, so not terribly far off. With Flynn Fisher and Burton Fisher, our brother sister. That's Moretz and Rayner, and they're kind of set in. They don't ever say it, I don't think, It's filmed in North Carolina, but I don't know if they've mentioned that in the show. But everybody's got kind of like a Carolinian accent from the U.S. So it has kind of like a small town, not necessarily backwoods, but it has like a small town kind of like southern feel as far as the language goes and the dialogue. But it is from series creator Scott Smith with Westworld creators Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy as executive producers. It's an adaptation of William Gibson's novel of the same name, The Peripheral. And in the show, slight spoilers, but really not much plot-wise has happened, so I can't spoil too much. It's there's virtual reality gaming and technology has really affected society. Things like you've got haptic feedback implants that you see in people. I think they're called haptics. You have people answering phone calls in their head, like with their eyeballs. The visual that the show gives you is that when someone calls someone else digitally, there's like a ring that happens around their iris, and then the person blinks to answer, and then they basically just lie in bed and like or stand wherever they are and speak. And much the same as you and I would with earbuds in, they're just talking to the other person, and the audio seems to be happening privately for that person. So like the person receiving the call can hear the other person in their head, but it's not something that's outside. And yet there's no headphones, there's no external anything. So I'm not quite sure how it all works yet, but that's part of like the mystery of the show.
Imagine receiving a call that you just don't want to answer. Like normally, like if somebody calls you, the phone rings, and you're just like, I'm just going to leave that sit there. I'm going to wait until it just goes to voicemail. Imagine having it in this setup, and basically you can't blink. You have to just basically keep your eyes wide open. That's kind of how that sounds.
Well, there's probably some way to ignore it. Like there's probably some way to like, wink with right eye to answer, wink with left eye to send a voicemail or something.
Or roll your eyes.
Roll your eyes. That would be a good one. You'd never get a teenager to answer the phone. I feel like they're kind of like throwing it out there with like, this is basically how it works, but they're not explaining like all of the details. But they do focus a lot on eyeballs, and I'll give a warning here. Don't eat while you're watching this show because of eyeballs. And I'm going to leave it there. I don't think I need to discuss exactly what happens. But it was surprising, given that most of the show is kind of like set in this small town. They have these virtual reality headgear rigs that are the new thing. Like basically online gaming that we all experience now, but like amped up to the point where it's VR. And then in the VR scenes, it's just more TV show. Like they've filmed actors and stuff like that. It's not like it's a digital world or anything like that. They have cool special effects and different things, but it works a lot like someone going into some sort of like simulation game like Grand Theft Auto or a military game like Modern Warfare. And essentially one of the best ways that people that are good at this stuff can make money is by being hired by some rich person to get them to level 20 or to help them through a hard part of the sim. So they hire these people that are very good video gamers and sim players, and they come in, and that's how these people are making their money. And what I found so interesting about the show was the juxtaposition of this small town family kind of struggling to keep it together. Flynn is kind of like, she's the moral kind of like straight shooter in the group. Mm-hmm. Her older brother, Burton, I think it's her older brother, is the one that's in the Sims all the time, and he's trying to make money, and he's trying to help because their mom is sick. She needs medication. The medication is very expensive. They obviously don't have any kind of coverage, and so Flynn works at the local print shop, but it's a 3D print shop. Like just think about shelves and shelves of 3D printers, and they do stuff like print wedding toppers and there's stuff like that happens, like the kind of like the everyday that's just kind of taken the technology that we have and kind of like pushes it to like, what's this going to be in 20 years? Like people are not going to want to own their own 3D printer. They're just going to walk down the street and just pay some person that has like 100 3D printers to just print off the stuff that they need. And anyway, it was an interesting kind of like look at like the day to day. There's a double amputee in the show, and his wheelchair is really interesting and cool. He can go from like inside to outside. It is both a motorized vehicle on the street, and then he can kind of like remove half of it and then go into a bar on like a single wheel wheelchair. It's very, very interesting that they've just kind of taken these things and just kind of like, they're just tweaked enough to make it sci-fi, but everything else is very believable and very gritty. There's still just terrible people. Corbel Pickett, I believe, is the one of the antagonists in the show. That's Lewis Hertham that I mentioned at the top. And you've seen him in other stuff before, playing a very similar role, kind of like that smooth talking Southern mustache twirling kind of gangster deal. And the show is violent in some places, so you got to be careful of that. Definitely not for kiddies at all. But the relationship with Flynn and Burton is really interesting, because in the show she kind of looks at him as kind of a slacker, but as you find out, because their mom is short on meds, he's dealing with some chronic pain and hiding it because he's giving his extra meds to his mom, who was ailing and failing, kind of like in bed. So they do a good job of like painting these stereotypes, which you think you get in the first 20 minutes of the show, and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, yeah, he's kind of a slough off, do nothing gamer, but he's got a heart of gold and he's doing some nice things for the family at his own expense. Anyway, he gets sent a prototype sim piece of headgear. I don't remember what he called it. And the company wanted him to test it, and they're going to pay him a lot of money. It's like 2 months worth of keeping the family afloat, so he can't say no. The thing is that it wasn't him playing that they were interested in. It was Flynn using his avatar to play Sims. Flynn is a bit of a savant in the sim world. She's almost infamous at how good she is at this stuff, but she doesn't do it because she has to earn money, support the family, all that kind of stuff. So he convinces her, like, look, they're paying me because they think it's me, but they really want you to test drive this thing. So could you please do it? It's enough money to sustain us for a couple months. And the family finances are stressful for Flynn, so she agrees. Anyway, this thing is more than it appears. And it's new technology that basically allows the person partaking in the sim to feel pain, even if it's not physically felt. Your brain is registering that you're being stabbed or you're being shot or hit or you fell off your bike or whatever. And so she is really taken by the experience, but it gets really spooky really quickly. And that is where all the mystery comes in, because you don't know who sent them this headgear. There is like a dark net hit put out on the family, and she and her brother and her brother's friends have to react to that. And there's this whole other layer where her brothers and her brother's friends react like an elite military force. And you're like, wait a minute, are these guys like former military, and are they retired and now they just kind of like sit around and play video games? Or are they people that play Sims so much and have gotten so good at it that they operate like a elite military team, doing like defending their home against these people that are coming to try and kill them? So it went from like this interesting sci-fi drama of like the introspective idea of like, what if the world had all this virtual connection, to like straight up action show in the first episode. And then bleeding over into the second. So I'm on board. I've heard some mixed reviews online, but I haven't quite finished the second episode yet. So I'm leaving it as a high potential show, very high production value. It looks fantastic. Great acting, especially from Moretz. Moretz is, I mean, she's a decorated actor anyway, but she's really, really good in this. There's a lot of physical acting too. Like when she's got her eyes closed and she's in the sim, they'll do these shots of her kind of like reacting to what's happening. Just emotionally, just like squints and facial stuff, like all the things that she does really convince you of like panic or pain or being enthralled or being wowed by the environment. And she's doing it with her eyes closed, literally. So there's a lot going on there that I really like. I would say it's probably my new Friday night show now that The Lord of the Rings of Power is over. And I stand here surprised because I have definitely not had the best things to say about Prime Video series in the past. And now that seems to be the higher bar of show that I tend to go for now. It tends to be on Prime. And I'm wondering how much of that is here's the first two, and then every Friday from here on out.
Especially when you've got the creators of Westworld. I mean, they've easily established that they know what they're doing with this kind of thing as well. That's because I saw this trailer, I want to say about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was very intrigued the moment I saw the futuristic version of London and seeing streets that I used to walk down every day, now all looking very sci-fi-esque and stuff. But then at the very end of the trailer, when it said that it was by Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, it's like, oh, okay, this looks like it's going to be very good then, and it certainly sounds like they've held up to that bar from what you've described.
I've never finished Westworld. Did that show wrap, or did it just kind of like go into endless,
Oh,
like distant seasons on HBO?
they have finished the fourth season, and there's a fifth on the way.
Okay, so I don't think I finished the fourth.
I like that each season is doing something very different, and the trailer for season 5 looks like it's going to be incredible. I really love the direction that they've taken the show, and so I highly, highly recommend watching it. If you enjoyed the first season, even though it seems a bit weird as they kind of step away from the park, um, there's other stuff that goes on that may bring you back there a little bit. So it's very interesting the direction it goes without trying to spoil much.
Without getting into the details as to why, there are some similarities between Westworld and the Peripheral that I do pick
I
up on.
could see that from the trailer. Yeah, there was definitely elements of that piqued my interest, I should say.
And so my guess is that if people are giving it poor reviews or just going like, bah, it's just like Westworld, it's probably because there are some parallels, but there's only 2 episodes. Like you can't just say, oh, this is just another Westworld, because there's only 2 episodes. Like give it the season and see what it does. And already for me,
Yeah.
it's doing enough different from Westworld that I think it's interesting. What I like so much about this compared to Westworld is that Westworld feels so far in the future compared to where we are now. And given the recent news from virtual reality, developers and stuff in the last few years, especially this fall, I would say that like this is closer in terms of, it's sort of like when Jurassic Park came out, like, and taking like the DNA and cloning and just kind of like pushing that little extra mile. It's like, no, we're not there, but it's feasible. Like it's not completely unbelievable, which is I think one of the reasons why that movie worked so well in the 90s. And I think that that's, what they're doing here is like everybody's talking virtual reality. Like it's definitely things that makes evening news or morning talk shows or whatever, or podcasts. And I feel like they're just kind of pushing it. It's like, well, what if this becomes like the economy in the world? And it's really interesting. So I won't get into why I think it's similar to Westworld, because I think that's a little bit of a spoiler for the first 2 episodes. But I would encourage people to check it out. I think it's good. So what has been on your big or small screen in the last little while?
I've been watching the brand new revival continuation series of Quantum Leap, and in between that, I've been rewatching the original series of Quantum Leap. I've been on just a big Quantum Leap binge fest, really, but I'm actually surprisingly liking it. It's airing on City TV in Canada, and it's an NBC show that streams on Peacock in the US. And I think they had originally about 10 episodes, but they just got extended to a full season order. So NBC are obviously happy with the direction the show's going in as well. But I know that you and I have spoken briefly, and you haven't seen Quantum Leap.
Oh, I'd seen the original. I didn't know.
Oh, you had to? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but for context, when it was actually on TV.
Right. As did I.
So it's been a minute, is what I'm saying. And not one of those shows that I ever look back on and think, I'd like to watch that again, or something that I felt would stand up. Because I remember being sick later on home from school and watching it in syndication, when it would be like airing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something, on whatever cable channel, and thinking like at that time, going like, "Woof, this is old," you know. So if I was saying that about the show before I was out of high school, then the chances of me going back and watching a show from 1989 now pretty slim.
I'm really still enjoying it. I think it holds up better than you'd expect. There's certainly some bits where um, perhaps it's a little bit like, that probably wouldn't happen these days. But it was very forward thinking. I mean, you've got to think 1989, early 90s. They have a cis straight white male who can leap into the bodies of all sorts of different people. So there's one episode where he leaps into a man, he goes to sit down at a restaurant, he has no idea that he's leaped into the body of a black man during the time of segregation. And that gets into a lot of trouble. There's other ones where he leaps into women who've dealt with harassment and dealing with stuff from the perspective of a cis white male, to kind of highlight certain things in a way that most other shows couldn't. It's similar to how Star Trek will use aliens to highlight different perspectives in society that you just couldn't do in a non-sci-fi setting. It was very forward thinking in that regard, and really good. Now, that show was also very episodic. The new revival series is a continuation. It doesn't have Scott Bakula in it, sadly. And Dean Stockwell, who played Al, has since passed away just a few years ago. But there are some nice nods to Dean Stockwell's character, which is good. But this continues on with a new team. They're reviving the program. And they are doing it where they're still leaping from life to life each episode, but there is an overarching story arc that's going on throughout the season, which as when you see the first episode, it's like, okay, this might work out. The more time goes on, and we're on episode 6 now, the more intrigued and involved I'm in as they start to pick out new pieces. Because the main premise is that they weren't ready to go, and a guy called Ben Song, played by Raymond Lee, steps into the Quantum Leap Accelerator prematurely. And unlike the original series, where that was just done because Scott Bakula's character needed to secure funding, we don't know why Ben Song leaped. He just decided to leap and go do this thing, and he's done some weird stuff with the program. But his brain is Swiss cheese, so he can't even remember why. So everybody's trying to ask you, like, what the hell are you doing? And he doesn't know. He doesn't have an answer. And so he's trying to discover that as well. And joining them is Ernie Hudson, who's in charge of the program. So to have Winston Zedmore from Ghostbusters is a nice highlight to the show. I'm really loving his portrayal in it. And he is playing a character called Herbert Magic Williams. Now, I don't know how good your memory is of the show, but there was a big episode where Sam Beckett leaps into a guy joined the Vietnam War, and he's there to help save his brother's life. And the guy that he leapt into is the guy that Ernie Hudson is playing.
Oh, interesting. So they've got some ties to the original series, even in the characters.
That's it. Because this show is created by Donald P. Belisario and produced by Deborah Pratt. They are the same creator and producer that worked on the original series. Deborah Pratt actually is also the voice of Ziggy and basically the narrator at the beginning of each episode. So you've got the same team continuing this. So it's not like just somebody else has gone, oh, I want to remake that show that I used to like when I was younger. This is the original creators, which is really good. So yeah, they've got those ties, and I won't go too much into why, but essentially there's some kind of residual memory that he had after the leap, and he's not really sure what happened, but because he was in the military, he rose through the ranks, and then it turned out that he got to a point where he had clearance, and he found out about the project and found out that he died in the original timeline. And he found out that Sam Beckett had saved his life. And so that's how he decided to get involved in the project, which is kind of neat. There's just something else going on and just seeing all these other characters trying to figure things out. We've got a character called Ian Wright, who's played by Mason Alexander Park, who's non-binary, and I love their performance. They're basically taking on the role of Gushy now, who is basically this sort of scientist engineer, and it's a lot of fun.
It's cool that they're not just remaking it. Like
That's it. Yeah.
the fact that it's an extent, like the original team doing it is at least something that feels less like a money grab. Like whenever these shows get remade by whoever, you're just like, oh God, like why? Like I'd rather see something new most of the time. Like adapt a new novel. I'm not saying that it has to be an original, show, but like, Peripheral, like it's an existing novel, but it's not like it's the remake of the Peripheral from 1984. Do you know what I mean? Like which doesn't exist. I made that up, but like they're not just rehashing old stories. They seem to be doing something new, which is cool. So, and that's nice with Quantum Leap. And I kind of forget because I think about Quantum Leap as like one of those doofy episodic dramas that was on TV when I was a kid. I don't think about it as sci-fi when it obviously is. You know what I mean? Like it has enough in it to call it a sci-fi show.
The funny thing is that society didn't see it that way either, because back then in the early 90s, sci-fi was never brought up for Emmy Awards. Never. That wasn't a thing. This was nominated for 51 Emmys, and it won a few of them. So it was being seen as a drama, which is pretty incredible. Just because, like I said, sci-fi just was not really held in that higher regard. So that was good. And talking about novels as well, I've actually ended up finding a few of the original novels of Quantum Leap. I've just in a very short space of time, I've amassed a collection of 8 of them so far. And so I've been reading through one called Prelude, which is the 4th book, I think it is. And it's everything that took place before the pilot episode. So there's a bit of backstory as to how the project even started. So that's kind of intriguing.
So sticking with sci-fi and sci-fi news, there's a lot of Star Wars stuff either wrapping up or coming soon or returning. And the only thing that I've really had the time to look at, because it's probably my favorite of the new series, is the trailer for the next season of Picard. And I am stoked. I remember talking with you about the teaser from, I think it was Comic-Con this year, where it was just audio. It was just like still images or like B-roll shots of like a desk, probably Picard's desk. And it was, Picard, Crusher, Riker, Worf, LaForge, like all just kind of like voicing over and saying like, we're with you. We'll go to the end of the universe and one more adventure, that kind of stuff. And seeing the trailer, and one of my favorite things about Picard is just that friendship between Riker and Picard. And just like that steadfast kind of, I know what you're going to ask me before you ask it. Yes is the answer, of course, but I need to know the details. Like, it's just like, why are you still like, there's a conversation in the trailer about, Picard is asking Will Riker to do something really dangerous. And Picard is trying to like get around to like, look, this is really important. And he's trying to like present his case. And Riker's just like, when are we leaving? It's like, and I love that kind of candor that they have. And so I don't want to go overboard with watching too many trailers, because I think there's been another one that's come out, but I decidedly said like, no, like I really like this show and I really like the reveals. And I did not know that Riker and Troy were going to be in the first season of Picard. And so that was a huge surprise for me watching the show. So now, even though in the trailer I know what actors are going to be in it, I don't know when or how they're going to arrive. So I don't want to see like a trailer clip and have that be like, well, that was part of the reveal. I don't want that spoiled for me.
Yeah.
So I've decided to not watch any more trailers, but I'm definitely looking forward to the next season of Picard. But you've obviously got a whole list of stuff that's coming up. But starting with Picard, like, you're looking forward to it as well, I'm assuming?
Oh, absolutely. And we will clarify, this is Star Trek and not Star Wars, as was mentioned earlier.
Did I say Star Wars?
You said Star Wars.
Wow.
I found it very entertaining. But yeah, the trailer that they released has a lot of highlights in it, which have gotten everybody excited. I am thrilled to bits with it. But one of the other things that they've said is that doesn't have like the big reveal and stuff. That doesn't have like the big spoiler stuff. And we're like, what? Wait, but there's all this big stuff. And they're like, yeah, there's stuff that's bigger. So I'm glad that they're holding back a lot in the trailer as well. So that's good to see. But one of the things which I think is absolutely fantastic is that we get to see, obviously, a lot of the original crew. It's not a reunion. It's not like them just all meeting up and going out and doing stuff. There is a plot thread that starts with a distress call from Beverly Crusher, and that's what gets the ball rolling, and then other people will start to come in as time goes on. A little bit like how Riker and Troy weren't just in season 1 at the beginning. They kind of came into it, and it felt natural for that to happen. It's the same with this, which I'm liking. But we also get to meet LaForge's 2 daughters as well. So there's going to be Ensign Sydney LaForge, who's played by Ashley Sharp Chestnut, who I'm not familiar with. I looked at the IMDb page. I've not seen anything from there, but the 2 shows that I'd recognize the names of, she was in an episode of Gotham, and she was in 4 episodes of Homeland. And then we also have Ensign Alondra LaForge, who's played by his real-life daughter, Mika Burton.
Oh, cool.
And that is something where I've been hoping, with how much she's been involved in presenting a lot of the Star Trek after shows and things like that, and some of the Star Trek events, I thought she would just be great to finally play LaForge's daughter, and it's actually happening, which is great. But it is only the 2 daughters. There's no sign of Brett LaForge. And that is a character that was only ever mentioned in dialogue in the series finale, All Good Things. So when they're in the future with the anti-time anomaly, Geordi mentions that he's got 3 children. So 2 daughters and a son, but it looks like they're just sticking to the 2 daughters. But again, that future never happened. So when Picard changed history, then Geordi's lost a son from the sounds of it. And age-wise, I mean, he was due to apply to Starfleet Academy the following year. So
I'm not so deep into Star Trek that I reckon, like, I know what those timelines are and how they interact. And they did so much time hopping or time manipulation in the TNG show that I'm just like, I don't remember where they ended up and what the rules were. And it's one of the problems, I think, too, when you watch a lot of sci-fi and everybody's got different rules for time travel, you know? And so you're like, wait a minute, which rules apply to this show? Like, how does this work? So, although I have to say, though, like, one of my favorite TNG movies was First Contact, right? Like, I think that's one of my standout favorites in that series. And that dealt with time travel as well, too, right? So,
which spilled over into Enterprise as well.
Right.
They had an episode that followed on from that, and in a way it kind of showed that a lot of time meddling resulted in Enterprise. So Enterprise is a slight skew on the timeline as well, which is quite interesting. I love that Worf is now a pacifist.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't overplay that. Like, it's a fun line from the trailer, but I'm hoping that it's just like the one-time thing. I hope they don't milk that too much.
At the same time, it's nice to see Worf's development, because in the early seasons, Worf didn't really have much of a character. Throughout TNG, he started to develop one, but it wasn't really until Deep Space Nine that you really got into a lot of the meat of who Worf is and got to see him progress. So it's nice to see that we're not just seeing Worf, and I imagine the others just as they were when we last saw them, in the same way that Picard has changed over time. It's good to see that these characters have developed, and it's going to be interesting to see what those changes have been in their lives since we last saw them. I think that's going to add a lot more intrigue. We've also got the Enterprise F was shown, and it is a design that has been around for a while. And there's a game called Star Trek Online, and it's the Enterprise F from that. So that ship that they've had, the future Enterprise, in a video game is now officially canon and is the official successor to the Enterprise E. I don't know how I feel about that. In a way, I think it is good. I've just never been a fan of the design of that ship. So we'll have to see if it grows on me after I see it a little bit more in live action. But I imagine you probably haven't seen that design.
Did it zip by in the trailer?
Yes.
Okay, so briefly, but I don't see, the thing is, like, again, I don't see that in the trailer and go, oh, that's from that video game. Like, I see that and go, like, that looks like maybe it's one of the Enterprise from one of the movies, but it's like, but didn't they all blow up? Like, I thought that was one of the things in the movies, that they always end up changing
Yeah.
ships because the adventure ends up destroying it.
Yeah.
So I don't really remember. And then there's other things where, like, you get into the future and the Enterprise from the future looks different. So, like, I've got all kinds of different versions of the Enterprise in my head, and I can't tell you where they come from, right? So it's not something like, for me with Star Wars, when I would recognize like an X-wing or a TIE fighter, an A-wing or something immediately and be like, oh, I know what that is. Whereas with Star Trek, I can't, especially because in recent years other series have taken the kind of classic looking saucer and I guess it's the warp nacelle kind of look of Federation ships and kind of done all kinds of different things with them. Like, you've got Discovery, you've got Strange New Worlds is Enterprise, but like, you've got I'm trying to think about what they were called. There were other ships even in Picard that had like a similar but different kind of look to them.
Oh yeah.
And so, well, what are the, like, I can't remember what, at the end of the first season of Picard, Riker arrives with like a whole fleet of these like elite class something starships from the Federation, and they all kind of look like a pointy version of an Enterprise, you know?
Yeah, they were all very cookie cutter, copy paste. There was about 4 subtle variations amongst them. A lot of fans didn't like that they just looked so similar. So that's why in season 2 we get a lot more variety in the ships and some older designs as well, which feels a bit more true to what we'd normally see.
I think the only ship design in Star Trek recently that I was like, it doesn't really do it for me, is Book's ship from Discovery.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's okay. Like, it's not, it gets points for being original, I guess. But for me, it just reminded me of the B-Wings from Star Wars. But they have so much more interesting shape language. And this was just like, okay, well, the cockpit's on one side. But like, other than that, it's just not really.
It looks like a broken boomerang.
Yeah. And doesn't it, like, it has some sort of weird, like, it reshapes itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. Yeah. And when ships start doing that, I'm just like, okay, like, I kind of want, as much as I like sci-fi and the fantastical nature of all this stuff, I do kind of want ships to be like a solid thing, you know? Yeah. It gives you kind of like a grounding, you know?
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. We've got some new and returning cast for this show as well. The new villain is played by Amanda Plummer, who is the real life daughter of Christopher Plummer. So she's now joining the Star Trek family that her father's been part of, because he played General Chang in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. And so to have her come on board is going to be very interesting. She's playing a character called Vadik, who's an alien captain of a ship called the Shrike. And we don't know much about her motives. All we know is that she's got her sights set on Picard and his crew from his days on the Enterprise. So it feels like a bit of a revenge story, but as to how or why, what did the crew do that's set things in motion, not sure, but that's going to be interesting. The one thing that really got me excited is that Daniel Davis is returning as Professor Moriarty. And it's odd because I was thinking about our mutual friend Hannah, who is working her way through Star Trek The Next Generation. And she's seen the first episode with Moriarty. She hasn't seen the second one. That got me kind of thinking, like, it would be so good if we could just see one more, because his stories are so, they're brilliant episodes. For those who don't know, Moriarty is a holodeck character that gains sentience and becomes super intelligent and manages to take over the ship twice. And so to have him returning a third time is basically a dream come true for me in that regard. Do you recall those particular episodes? Was he a character that you kind of latched on?
Oh, yeah. I watched TNG once through when it was live with my dad, because that was just a thing that we did when I was a teenager. And then when it was on in syndication, the two Star Trek shows that I'm most familiar with are TNG and Voyager. Voyager was like a 5 o'clock show when I was in university because it was again on in syndication. So like I watched entire seasons in a couple of weeks because it was on daily, like Monday through Friday sort of thing. And I do remember the holodeck episodes because I don't remember whether when TNG was in syndication, whether they were airing it in order or whether they would just be airing like popular episodes and stuff. But I did always really enjoy the holodeck episodes. I always paid more attention to them. Like, for example, if I was seeing TNG on TV in syndication, if it was a holodeck episode, I would be more likely to stick around and watch it than I would if it was just like another Ferengi episode or something. I was like, bah, whatever. Like I've seen them, so I don't necessarily need this one in my life. But I would stick around for the holodeck ones just because I found that they broke out of that kind of like talking suits on a bridge thing that they did an awful lot in the show. And I also, and this could be true, I don't know, it felt like the actors had more fun with the holodeck episodes, you know, like for example, the Robin Hood one, like, I mean, like everybody remembers that, right? The Robin Hood TNG episode. Worf especially in that one.
There's also one where Patrick Stewart gets to show off his Shakespearean chops by actually portraying one of those characters when he's with Data, and they're basically going through Shakespeare. So it's really neat to see Picard teaching Data.
And that must have been a treat for Brent Spiner too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And talking of which, he's returning again. There seems to be no shortage of characters for Brent Spiner to play these days, but he is going to be returning as Lore, and there is no context around that because the last that we saw, Data had dismantled and disabled Lore, and then we've had the synths who have been outlawed, and now we've got Lore back somehow. And if he's messing around in the fold, and is he in charge? Is he just being rebuilt and recruited? Who knows? But that is like a massive spanner in the works that's going to be interesting.
So aside from Picard, what are we looking forward to in the Star Trek series going forward?
There may be another movie. Star Trek 4 was cancelled, so that's the one in the Kelvin timeline. And Patrick Stewart, when he was on stage, said that I understand there were Paramount Plus people here and execs from Paramount Pictures. And then he kind of pleaded with them like, we could still make a movie. So that sounded more like it was a pitch for a potential film as opposed to him confirming that there's one. I think he was almost trying to use the crowd to get on his side. So who knows? This may not be the end, but it is the final season of Picard is 10 episodes and it debuts February 16th of next year. So there could be more there. But in terms of other stuff that's coming out TV-wise, Lower Decks has just finished its last episode today for season 3. Not the last episode of the show, but just of the season. So that came out today. I haven't had a chance to see it yet. But Prodigy is another show that's more family orientated, and they're releasing the first part of the second half of season 1, and that comes out today as well. So today's a bit of a drop for 2 Star Trek shows, which is fantastic, especially as Lower Decks is an incredible comedy. It's so true to Star Trek and one of my favorites so far. But when Prodigy returns with the USS Protostar, we're apparently going to find a few new things about the ship and what it's for. And Ronnie Cox is going to be reprising his role of Edward Jellicoe. So he people know him as Dick Jones from RoboCop. In Next Generation, he played a captain who took over from Picard briefly for a couple of episodes during a 2-part special. And so he's going to be coming back reprising that role, which is going to be exciting. And so that all returns today. I don't know when he's going to show up or for how many episodes, but that's going to be fun to see. And then we've got Strange New Worlds, where there's not been much information released. All we know is that they started filming the second season in February. They wrapped it in July, so they're all just doing post-production. And we don't know anything more specific than it's coming out sometime 2023. So I'd imagine probably towards the tail end. And we're finally, because um, I don't know what your feelings were, but I liked that they were doing things episodic per character.
I only ever saw maybe 2 or 3. I don't remember. I didn't get very far into it because I got so
Oh,
frustrated
right.
with the Crave app. Like it
Yeah.
looked like it could have been a beautiful show, and the Crave app was basically streaming it in 720p. It was garbage.
Right. Yes, I
So
remember this now. Yeah.
so I had to peel off, and it was just, it wasn't worth the money. And then recently, actually, you and I were discussing in between podcasts that I decided to resub to Apple TV Plus because they've got some new offerings, and the Apple has the one package now, so like it makes it easier for me to subscribe to a couple of things. And I'm already, it's similar to Amazon Prime, where like I'm paying for Prime shipping, so I have access to Prime Video, and I kind of think about them as one cost, so it makes it more cost effective. Same thing, Apple's doing this package thing. I use Apple Music, so like it makes more sense for me. So then I now have access to Apple TV Plus again. And one of the things that I can do is with an add-on, it does cost more money, but I could add on briefly, like if I wanted to catch up on something on Paramount Plus, I could add that to Apple TV Plus. However, it doesn't have all the titles. It has Discovery, it has Picard, but it doesn't have Strange New Worlds. And Strange New Worlds is the one that I want to watch because I've fallen off of Discovery. I got tired of Sad Whispers Star Trek, so I haven't been back to. I don't even remember where I left off with Discovery. I'd have to go look at my watch history to figure out where that was.
Well, I know Megan's wanting to watch it as well, so maybe we should make a thing of it and just have a Strange New Worlds viewing session over time. The three of us. That could be fun.
Like that's not a bad idea because now that pandemic restrictions are so much like lighter and it's a lot safer to do that kind of stuff. Because back when this stuff was really taking off, it was all everybody just being home, right? Like it with the watch parties. It's not that we wouldn't want to. It's just like we really shouldn't, But that's no longer the case, I don't think.
With Strange New Worlds, each episode was very character driven, which is great. Focusing on that because that's what changed Star Trek: The Next Generation from season 3 onwards and made that so good. And again, doing this episodic, it makes sense to do it that way. But one character was missing, and that was Ortega. She never got her story. And so they teased at Comic-Con. They're like, we're not really showing you anything about the season, but we are going to show you one clip, and it's all focused on Ortega. So it's great that we're going to have that coming back as well.
Remind me, is she the security officer?
She's the helmsman.
Helmsman. Ortega's the helmsman. Okay. I'm drawing a blank. So which one is the one that escaped the slave race?
Lan Noonien Singh, that's the one that you're thinking of. That's the security officer.
I think the episode that I remember seeing most recently was the episode that focused on the second in command.
Right, yes.
Was there an episode about Uhura?
Yep. There's been an episode on all of them.
Right. So which one came first? Or was it the Uhura episode, or was it the number one episode?
Ooh, trying to remember the order. That
I feel like they were back to back. So those are the last two that I remember seeing.
Yeah.
So I think maybe 3 episodes into the season. I don't think I got very far.
That makes sense. Yeah. They tend to have 2 Star Trek days a year. One that coincides with when First Contact takes place, and then the other coinciding when Star Trek first aired. So that gives them good spacing, about 6 months apart throughout the year. So I imagine during the next Star Trek Day, then we'll probably get more information on Strange New Worlds. Another one that we got a little bit more information on was Discovery. So this is the one that you are caught up with, and if you're not, then you'll be able to get caught up with Paramount Plus at least.
Yes, I will be able to get caught up with it if I want to. Every time I try, I get like 2 episodes in, and I just like, this is just the same, and it makes me sad. Like it's not it's not a fun show to watch. That's my beef with it, is that it's like everybody is just sad and depressed, and it's always the only thing, the thing I find about Discovery, which is I think the elephant in the room, it's very similar to people's complaints about Superman comics. Like in order to challenge Superman, in order to have any kind of like real kind of heroic story, they tend to throw like not only the fate of the world, but like the fate of the entire universe is in his hands. And I feel like every plot in Discovery is just like, oh, if we don't stop this, then the entire galaxy is going to fold in on itself and all life as we know it will cease to exist. It's like, well, if that
Yeah.
happens, then none of you are going to be around to worry about it. So who cares? Like, I find that every time they turn around, it's like, oh, the whole universe is in peril. It's like, but again, like, could you guys stop doing that? Maybe like, I don't find it very intriguing.
Yeah, I must admit, season 4 is when I was just like, okay, again, really? Like, I was enjoying it, but it was just like, this is just every time. So there's 3 bits of news that they brought out, and one of them is that it's not going to be a galaxy-wide crisis threat type thing. However, it is going to be a galaxy-wide treasure hunt with disastrous results if the Federation doesn't find whatever secret it is. So at least it's not just like we've got this big impending doom thing. It seems to be like a treasure hunt race. Perhaps they have to get to something before somebody else does. I'm not sure, but at least it sounds like they're trying to shake things up a little bit and do something different. So I'm hoping that's the case for it for the very reasons you've just described.
Yeah, I mean, I like the actors in it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I mean, the characters and the actors are great. I really enjoy actually I can't remember the characters' names, but the navigator and the helmsman on Discovery. Both of those actors, they do such a fun, fantastic job. They're so unique, and I feel like they bring a lot to it. And I think I don't remember. I think it was season 3. What's the one where Book's planet is blown up? Is that season 3 or season 4?
I think that's season 4.
Okay, so season 4 is the one that I got into, but then I maybe never finished.
Yeah.
So I'm not as far behind as I thought. But during season 4, I feel like they gave an awful lot of character development to those two characters. And again, I feel bad I'm not remembering their names. But
Detmer and Oa-Second, and Detmer is one of my favorite characters. Actually, I'm now that they started showing more of her, especially showing how she dealt with being flung forward. That was I've really enjoyed that, and I've spoken about that in a previous episode here as well.
I think that's probably where I was getting intrigued, but then like the other stuff, the overall plot was just like pulling me out of it.
Yeah.
It's one of those shows that it's so highly produced and like I want to like it and I want to get into it. And I have the same issues with like trying to go back and watch TNG. I remember liking it. I know it's a good show, but I go back and because it's such an older show, like it's hard to get through that first season, you know?
One thing that you have to give it credit for is that all the other shows that we're enjoying, like Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks and Picard, etc., all owe themselves to Discovery. Discovery is what allowed those to happen. So I'm glad it exists for that reason alone.
No, that's very true.
In a way, each show is completely different. And so I like that not everybody has to like every show. There is always going to be a show that you do like. And the fact that there's that variety there has always been the case. Next Generation was always very different to the original series. Deep Space Nine, very different to those two. Voyager comes along, again, very different. And like it's always a different show. There's nothing that's just like one set formula. Which is good. So the other 2 pieces, one of them was just the release date, which they're saying late 2023. So again, we don't know exactly when that's coming out beyond that. But the other part was a new character and actor joining the show. And that's Callus Keith Rennie playing a character called Captain Rayner. And people will know him as the Cylon Model Number 2 from Battlestar Galactica. He is a great actor. I think he's going to bring a lot of complexity and gravitas to the show. His Starfleet captain is apparently going to be very gruff but smart and has a storied track record of wartime success. And so, I think having him on is going to be good. He's actually the second actor from Battlestar Galactica. The first was Rekha Sharma, who played Tori Foster. Just seeing him in the promotional material, that's got me very excited about what he'll bring to the show.
It's funny how casting will get you excited, even though it's really the plot that keeps you going. You know what I mean? Like once you get, I can get excited about casting, but if the show doesn't have a great plot or if it gets repetitive, then it's like, well, then I really start to lose interest. But when you see promotional material or if you hear about casting, and specifically with starship captains in Star Trek, I find that a lot hinges on that.
Yes.
And I feel like I remember even seeing an interview with Anson Mount talking about it and him saying like, you know, I don't want to say pressure, but like there's definitely a known set of boots you have to fill in
Yeah.
terms of your performance. With the, I guess, knowing this is kind of like a bit of a pun, like you kind of have to be commanding, like in that role. But in a presence kind of way, it not necessarily bossing people around and sounding, like a military person, but like I feel like there's an amount of gravitas that has to come with being a captain.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's got to be tricky for casting. Like that has to be a tough nut to crack.
So for Starship Voyager, when they were shooting the pilot, Kate Mulgrew was not the original Captain Janeway. We had a different one played by a Canadian actress, Genevieve Bujold. And when you watch the early test footage, she is not right for the part. It feels flat. There's just really not much going on there. It really makes you appreciate how good an actor Kate Mulgrew is, especially when it comes to facial expressions and stuff. Now, Genevieve was more of a film actor. She ended up not being interested in signing on for the show. So she quit, and then that's when she was recast. But yeah, when you watch both of them side by side, you see how much of a difference the actor can bring to that script. So when you're saying, like, obviously the plot is important, absolutely it is. When you see an actor coming on board like Callus Keith Rennie, and you know that there's that gravitas there, you know that whatever that script is like, they are going to be able to elevate it. And that's what gets me excited. It's like you could have just a fairly lame script, but if you know that Patrick Stewart's there, you know that at least he's going to be able to bring stuff out of that script that a lesser actor probably wouldn't be able to, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm still excited when it actually comes out.
I mean, I hope I have access to a lot of that stuff, with the Apple TV Plus app on my Xbox anyway, being really good in terms of the image quality. So with sci-fi shows, like I really don't like it when the image quality is terrible, because it kind of takes me out of any kind of suspension of disbelief that happen with all these cool effects and ships and things like that. So yeah, I'm hoping to have access that I feel justified in paying for to watch the shows. So we'll see. And I know that I'll have access to back seasons of things like, Lower Decks or Prodigy or whatever. I see them on multiple platforms too. It's not just Apple TV Plus. I've seen them on Crave. I think I've seen them in other, I think I can watch them on YouTube. Like there's a bunch of different places that you can watch. I mean, if you've got certain paid access, because it's all, at some point, it's all like partnership with Paramount Plus. Like Paramount Plus seems to be an add-on to other streaming services, depending on where you are in the world. We won't get into the whole licensing issue because we'll be here for another hour. But yeah, like I do hope I can get, regain access to a good streaming service that has this content, because I do like Star Trek overall. Like I nitpick here and there. But I think for me, the thing that I'm looking forward to the most is the next season of Picard. And I feel like the other shows are things I will save for waiting in between episodes of Picard.
Yeah.
Like when I'm in that Star Trek zone, I'll be watching the other stuff in between to probably catch up.
And that is one of the good things that they staggering shows out. So other than, for example, today, where there's one episode, one show ending its season, another show beginning its season on the same day. Other than that, there's really no overlap. So there's Star Trek on the air all the time, but it's not kind of like it was at the late 90s, where we ended up with multiple shows running simultaneously, and it was kind of leading to a bit of fatigue as a result, which is great.
Well, that brings us into the Internet Minute, which is, of course, brought to you by you. The Citadel Cafe is 100% listener supported. If you get value out of the show, please consider putting a little bit of value back in. You can become a member at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Joining at any level will get you an invite to the member-only Discord server that's shared with my personal Discord, and, of course, access to the Bristacut audio bonus sessions. Special thanks go out to our Bean Counter patrons, Cosmic and Smurf588. Thank you very much for your support of this episode. Patron count is at 28. That is steady on from last week. Our goal each week is to have at least one more patron than the week before. If you would like to be patron number 29, visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. I do not have a pick this week, but Alastair, you have come armed with a pick for the viewers and the listeners. What is your pick this week?
So mine's a series of videos from a guy called Colin Furze. He's a YouTuber, stuntman, inventor, maker, filmmaker, and former plumber as well, which has become very useful for the stuff that he's doing. He's made a ton of gadgets. He even made Griff's extendable baseball bat, which was a very fun episode as well. And his work has been featured on TV shows like Top Gear, where he made some functional Bond cars with all the gadgets and flamethrowers and stuff. And he was a presenter on Sky One's Gadget Geek. So he's up there. And back in 2015, Sky One had a show called You, Me, and the Apocalypse. And so in partnership with them, he dug a giant hole in his back garden and built an underground bunker. So that was back in 2015. Later on, he decided he wanted to build a tunnel from that bunker to his house and his shed. And so he's had to tunnel underneath these buildings. He can't just dig them up. So he's been digging through and building this whole secret tunnel system. And it's been fantastic. I discovered it during the pandemic, and he just finished phase 1 of that tunnel. I think there's been about 10 episodes for it. They're about 20 minutes in length. And so just going and watching Colin Furze digging a secret tunnel is a joy, just seeing somebody who obviously understands how to do all this building work, seeing them problem solving. This is where his skills as a plumber has come in well, when he's trying to figure out about ventilation and pumping heat into there so he doesn't freeze, all that kind of stuff. But it is just fascinating. And who would not want to have a secret tunnel leading to an underground bunker under their house? In, I think it's Nottingham, I think he's from, or Lincolnshire, I think he's from. So yeah, that is a lot of fun and worth checking out.
I recognize it. I've not been following the channel. I don't know if I've watched an entire episode, but I've certainly come across a video somewhere late at night or something like that. Like watched a 3-minute edit or a YouTube short, or I've seen a presentation. Maybe it was someone showcasing it or something, but I've definitely seen him doing that, because I remember someone talking about all of the I guess legal stuff that he had to go through in order to get it done. Because you got to get building permits, and you can't just dig. Even though you own your backyard, you can't just go digging anywhere and building whatever you want, because you have to make sure that you're not going to be running into any underground pipes or drainage, or you don't want to build this thing in your backyard and as a result have all of your yard drain water flood your neighbor's house. You know what I mean? There's a lot to consider when you do stuff like this.
One of the later episodes, he actually reveals that some of it was he just did it and then asked for permission later. So there was a little bit of skirting around some of those laws, which was quite entertaining. But he just brings a lot of enthusiasm and energy and excitement to it, mainly because of his experience as a presenter. But also just getting to see things which I normally am not involved in. I've never done DIY, I've never done construction. So seeing him just build frames for concrete to be poured in and basically building the walls within this hole that he's built, it's fascinating. I absolutely love it.
As someone that's always lived in an apartment for my entire adult life, obviously we had homes growing up, but I wasn't old enough to even help Dad with any kind of DIY. And I did work with my stepfather for a little bit when I was in university, as he was a carpenter, but we weren't working on the home that we were living in. We'd be working on warehouses or contract jobs, stuff like that. And I was mostly demolition. I wasn't really building much. I might have framed the odd bit of framing, but most of the time it was me Joel, sledgehammer, knock down that wall. Okay. It was tiring, but it was a fun job. So any kind of DIY, any kind of building stuff, I always am really intrigued by it, and then super jealous too, because I just find that the trade skills that you have to do all that kind of stuff yourself, you have to learn a lot. And to do it well, especially if it's a place that you own and you live in, you don't want to do it poorly, because then it devalues and could cause a lot of problems down the line. And even if it's not something crazy like a bunker in your backyard, even if you're just renovating your dining room or putting in a new kitchen or doing those things, there's just a certain amount of, I can imagine, pride for folks that can do it very well and know how to do it properly. And I get jealous of people that either do it professionally or have been able to turn their hobby into like a side hustle with like a YouTube channel. Not, I mean, this is obviously probably this guy's full-time job, but like when people have content that they can then fund it, and then they end up, because they own a house, have all the proper tools. Like I've done a little bit of shelf work or a little bit of things around here in my apartment that are not permanent. They're just attached to the wall or whatever. But I don't even have an electric saw. Like, like I have to borrow one or go to my parents to use a table saw or something like that if I ever needed to do that. Whereas, when people have a home and they've invested in a couple of main tools that they can use for this kind of stuff, I'm always a little jealous, because it's like, man, not only do you get to own and shape the environment that you're in, but you also have the tools to do these kind of things without the need to hire a contractor or, like, I think like my cousins, he's very handy. My cousin Katie, her husband Brad, and I don't know them very well, but most of the time on social media, I'm just seeing whatever DIY project he's got going on. And I think he just does it for fun, and like he just enjoys doing what he does around the house, but he's so good at it. And I asked him, like, did you go to school for this? Like, are you, in trades? And he's like, nope, I just, learned on my own and just through practice. But my gosh, I mean, he does beautiful, beautiful work in terms of just like redoing a dining room or like building his own pizza oven in the backyard. I'm just like, my God, like, stop it. Like, I mean, at the same time, don't stop it, but stop it. Like, you could just leave some for the rest of us. Like, it's so cool to see that kind of skill, because
agreed. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm unskilled, but everything I do is digital. Like, everything I do is tied to digital online entertainment. And yes, it has to be creative, and you have to have a certain amount of skills and tools and all that kind of stuff to do it. And to some other people, that might be like reading Greek, whereas to me, because I'm so unpracticed in things like trades and carpentry and things like that around the house, that to me is just like, it's a whole skill set that I just don't possess yet. But hopefully, when, I eventually own a home or whatever, like, I think that would be, I can see myself getting pulled into that as like, right now, I think the closest I get to that kind of a creative hobby is like cooking. And for me, it'll be like, I can imagine the first project, in a home for me would be like whatever the backyard needs, like outside deck or patio or barbecue. Like, I need something to like make all this time I spend barbecuing worth it, and I can see that kind of focus. So, but yeah, I mean, that's really, really cool. I'll have to check this out, especially because like for these kind of videos, like a 20-minute video or a 10-minute video, that's not a big ask, because you're going to get a lot of details and a lot of looking. I do remember seeing the inside of this on some sort of, maybe it was like a talk show or something like that. But it does look very, very cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where even if you're not going to watch the whole thing, just watching the phase 1 complete video, the latest one, I mean, he's giving you basically a tour of the entire thing and kind of showing you everything that's there, and it's cool. And if you're watching the early ones, like there's a bit where he builds a minecart track so that he can shift all the debris and stuff. So he's got to come up with those kind of systems in there as well, which is really cool. So yeah, he does a lot of little fun gimmicky things in there.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Citadel Cafe. You can get more information about the show and links to some of the things that Alastair and I talked about at thecitadelcafe.com. Music for the show was composed by Kevin MacLeod, and you can email us at thecitadelcafe@gmail.com or find the show by name on Twitter. Subscribe for free on your favorite podcast app or find the show on YouTube. Word of mouth is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Citadel Cafe and where they can go to listen to it. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything I am doing online at joelduggan.com. Listen to my other podcasts all about Minecraft at thespawnchunks.com, and follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I have been streaming more frequently lately, including some Satisfactory streams, but we're returning to LEGO tomorrow and, of course, Minecraft on the weekend. Alastair, where can people find you online?
Well, I'm Alastair McFly, and you can check out both of my Star Trek retrospective podcasts over at longrangesensors.com. We're just coming off of our summer break, so we're going to be pumping out some new episodes soon. Plus, I have some holiday booked myself throughout November, so I'm going to be making some time to return to Twitch. So if you want to catch some of my Minecraft streams, you'll be able to follow me over at twitch.tv/Alastair McFly.
You've been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap, but you can only pick two.